evening. I'm your host, Karen Hudis. This show is a weekly series called The Network of Global Corporate Control that has been coming to you from DCTV for nearly 2 years. Today's segment is pre-recorded and is about the war on cash. Thanks to DCTV, Carmen Stanley, studio producer, Maurice Jackson, studio director, and Crochet Starnes, audio and prompter. Australia is setting up a task force to be headed by former KPMG Global Chairman Michael Andrew to draw on the experience of France, where the government is banning cash payments of over 1,000 euros, and Sweden, where businesses that trade in cash are required to use a certified cash register that is seen by tax authorities. Harvard professor and economist Ken Rogoff is once again leading the chorus of high-level academics and officials who declare cash is only for criminals. He made his case in a recent Wall Street Journal editorial called "The Sinister Side of Cash." The solution, he declares, is to simply get rid of anything but the smallest banknotes. What is coming next? Microchips. These are already used by some companies in Sweden. The syringe slides in between the thumb and index finger. Then, with a click, a microchip is injected in the employee's hand. At the Swedish company Epicenter, the company implants its workers with microchips the size of grains of rice that function as swipe cards to open doors, operate printers, or buy smoothies with a wave of the hand. And Patrick Mesterson, the co-founder and CEO of Epicenter, said, "The biggest benefit, I think, is convenience." As a demonstration, he unlocks a door by merely waving near it. It basically replaces a lot of things you have, other communication devices, whether it be credit cards or keys. Credit cards are replacing cash. The United States Federal Reserve has shown in a study the monthly shares of 3 payment instruments continued to be largest: 31.1% for debit cards, 25.6% for cash, and 23.3% for credit cards, while the share of electronic payments rose a significant 1.2 percentage points to 10.5%. What's wrong with this? With cash purchases, there's no control. There are no privacy issues. There's freedom. We have been showing the corruption in our money system. Getting rid of cash is the last frontier of freedom. I found out recently that the International Monetary Fund has disclosed plans for a cashless society. After I tweeted the IMF's paper, the document was removed from the internet. This only confirmed people's worst fears. I will read you from the PDF document that I emailed to the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs and mission to the UN, and then tweeted on April 14th. 3 days later, the blog disclosing the IMF's study was taken down from the internet. And you can see it in the teleprompter. The banking cartel's plans for a cashless society are not going to work, and it was retweeted and liked a number of times. And then I wrote on World Bank letterhead. On the 14th of April, "Dear Licia," with blind copies to 400 email addresses at the end of the teleprompter, including members of Parliament, the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and mission to the UN. Thank you for your email. It's taken me some time to produce this tweet, by using my laptop because the banking cartel didn't want this information to be disclosed. You're right, the banking cartel is not pulling this off, meaning the banking cartel's plans for a cashless society are not going to work. You have to differentiate between the Secretariat of the Bretton Woods institutions, that's the World Bank and IMF, and its Board of Governors. Under the Articles of Agreement of the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, that's the oldest agency of the World Bank, it's the Board of Governors that's in charge. The Secretariat, which is dominated by the banking cartel, is not in charge. I vote the shares of the United States on the Board of Governors during this interregnum in the legitimate government of the United States. That's while the U.S. Constitution of 1789 is not in effect. As I have said so many times, there's a coalition for the rule of law on the Board of Governors which is now in charge. It's someone from this coalition that's leaking these documents, that is the IMF's study on cashless societies. As for the Board of Executive Directors, they have a special role owing not only to the purpose of the Bretton Woods institutions, which is to administer the wealth of the world in the global debt facility, but also because the Articles of Agreement were designed for this purpose. For instance, Article 5, Section 5C provides that the President, officers, and staff of the bank, in the discharge of their offices, owe their duty entirely to the bank and to no other authority. Each member of the bank shall respect the international character of this duty and shall refrain from all attempts to influence any of them in the discharge of their duties. The board has helped me and certainly has not stopped me. Some of them have tried to admit me into the bank's headquarters. None of the embassies has contradicted me, and this says a lot. Look at how Sandra Okoro, the World Bank's former vice president and general counsel, was fired with not a single word in her defense, not even from the Nigerian embassies in Tokyo or Nigeria's New York mission to the UN, or from Nigeria's Minister of Finance, Kemi Adeosun, or Nigeria's Chargé d'Affaires in Washington, Mr. Hakeem Doyin Balogun. And then I signed off on the letter, and I'll read you the letter from Licia. That's actually not her real name. And she sent it on April 14th. And the subject, IMF plans for cashless society, disclosed, and the name of the blog was Towards a Better Understanding. Hi, Karen. What faction within the IMF is leaking these statements behind the Board of Governors' back? When you vote for the U.S. shares, how do they think they can pull this off? Taken into consideration the scale of corruption and blackmail, isn't it very likely that a substantial part of the board is at least guilty by association, or because of the tons of butter they might have on their own heads? What would be the mathematical probability for that scenario? As always, much love and a peaceful Pesach, that means Passover in Dutch. Licia. In the meantime, this document was removed from the internet and it wasn't archived. I do recall reading the statement that the IMF had put up about cashless society, and there were many others who saw it when I pointed it out on April 14th. It was liked on Twitter by at least 42 people and retweeted at least 38 times. The IMF technical paper contains suggestions about transitioning to a cashless society and the kinds of lies that could be used to disguise the true intent. The IMF paper was simply a catalog of the existing excuses that have already been given and which are going to be disclosed in this segment. Certainly, the removal of the IMF's paper on cashless society from the Internet doesn't change the fact that the IMF created a working paper on this topic to advise member countries. Many of the documents that were removed from the Internet have been restored. Like, for example, when the Chronologia website of Moscow State University was restored, and when my case that the Board of Governors settled in the United States Court of Appeals was restored to my website. Prime Minister Modi's decision on November 8th to demonetize India by removing its 500,000 rupee banknotes can only be understood by realizing that all of the banks in the world are part of a huge conglomerate that the three mathematicians who discovered this call the network of global corporate control. And the three systems analysts were named Stefania Vitali, James Glatfelder, and Stefano Battiston. And they were at the Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich, Switzerland. And the network is often referred to as the Banking Cartel. Prime Minister Narendra Modi's decision on November 8th to demonetize India by removing its 500,000 rupee banknotes can only be understood by realizing that all of the banks in the world are part of a huge conglomerate. The banking cartel has been trying to dominate the world. There are two other countries that are now trying to demonetize the currencies issued by the banking cartel, Venezuela and Australia. Venezuela had to suspend its demonetization program after looting. Australia's program has not yet begun. The World Bank report cited in the article was published by the Secretariat of the World Bank. The banking cartel has used state capture to try and take over the World Bank and IMF, when in reality, the Board of Governors runs the World Bank and IMF and manages the world's monetary gold reserves and other wealth. A coalition for the rule of law on the Board of Governors of the World Bank and IMF is really in charge, and I'm speaking for them as well as for the people who are cleaning up the corruption in the international monetary system. The global currency reset to replace the banking cartel's paper currencies for the world's gold and local currencies is now under implementation. I'm speaking for the U.S. and voting its shares until the U.S. Constitution of 1789 goes back into force and effect. And then I got an email. Hello, Karen Hudis. Thanks for the message about IMF plans for cashless society disclosed. And this is from one of the people who I had emailed this to, saying that they had received the email. Prime Minister Narendra Modi's decision on November 8th to demonetize India by removing its rupees 500,000 banknotes can only be understood. And then we've got that same statement that I've read twice. The banking cartel is trying to control the world by controlling us by taking away our cash currency. And of course, if we have to spend money by credit cards or other things, that they can just prevent us from spending that money. We'll starve if they don't allow us to spend our money using digital currency or credit cards. The government has maintained that the radical move to demonetize notes will end corruption, slash at the roots of terrorist funding from counterfeit notes, and flush out black money from the economy. It also said the move will help India turn into a cashless economy that thrives on digital transactions. These are lies, intending to cover up what the banking cartel really intends. The banking cartel is trying to dominate the entire world. The banking cartel is insolvent and in its death throes. The banking cartel issued bonds in the 1930s, which are now held by a trust established at the end of World War II called the Global Debt Facility. Together with accrued interest, these bonds are now worth over $2 quadrillion. The Global Debt Facility is managed by the 189 ministers of finance and development on the Board of Governors of the World Bank and IMF under the bilateral Mansfield Breakthrough Successor Agreement. I'm the Overseer Mandate Trustee of the Global Debt Facility, and I have recorded this debt of the banking cartel in UCC financing statements with the Secretaries of State in the states where the Federal Reserve banks are located. There are two other countries that are now talking about demonetizing their currencies issued by the banking cartel: Venezuela and Australia. In the past, countries such as Myanmar and Zimbabwe tried their luck with demonetization, with worrisome results. In India, the move is already drawing criticism, with several economists questioning the government's execution of the policy and raising concerns about the lack of infrastructure for a cash-free future in an almost entirely cash-dependent nation. Steve Forbes, chairman and editor-in-chief of Forbes Media, added his voice to the stream of criticism by the foreign media of the government's demonetization move, and he has an editorial that you could read in the teleprompter. I'm not going to read you his editorial. Forbes censured the Narendra Modi government for withdrawing 86% of legal currency in the country in an unprecedented act that will significantly hurt the economy. The banking cartel has been trying to dominate the world. What has happened instead is that the Internet has alerted the world's people to the sinister programs of the banking cartel. The banking cartel cannot win in light of the coalition that has formed to oppose it. The existence of this coalition was predicted by an accurate game theory model that came to the World Bank from the United States National War College in 2004. The purpose of the demonetization program was ultimately to place the banking cartel in control with a cashless society. This program is not going to be implemented. Instead, the paper currencies are getting replaced with local currencies issued by villages and towns, and with national currencies minted from the world's monetary gold reserves that are also held in the Global Debt Facility. In its last two meetings, the Board of Governors of the World Bank and IMF have agreed to a global currency reset. India is now a battleground country caught in the vise of a banking cartel that is insolvent and is going to be wound down in a global currency reset that has already been agreed. Prime Minister Narendra Modi's aggressive demonetization of the 500 and 1,000 rupee note is causing plenty of chaos in India. A general shortage of money has emerged. Massive lineups have formed at banks, and cash-based business has come to a standstill. All this would seem to indicate that the process has been ineptly carried out. But I'd argue that the problems listed are exactly what one should expect of a well-designed aggressive demonetization. Chaos is a feature, not a bug. As I mentioned in my previous post, a regular demonetization isn't meant to harm anyone. To ensure that no one is left behind, legacy notes are gradually replaced with new ones, a process that often takes decades to carry out. See, for instance, a pamphlet which was published by the Banco Central in the Philippines. It shows a slow and staged approach to replacing old peso notes with new ones. The goal of an aggressive demonetization like in Modi's is exactly the opposite, to leave people behind. To get this effect, the demonetization has to begin suddenly and quickly to replace old peso notes with new ones. The goal of an aggressive demonetization like Modi's is to begin suddenly and end quickly. Why didn't Modi make more preparations for the retirement of the rupees 500 and 1,000 note? For instance, to reduce lineups at banks and ATMs, the Federal Reserve Bank of India could have begun supplying banks with extra 100 rupee notes several weeks ago in order to ensure that there was sufficient supply on the 8th of November. And maybe the RBI could have nudged banks to purchase more safety deposit boxes to hold cash and hire extra staff to handle the rush, or take ATMs. One reason for lineups is that with the demise of the 500 and 1,000 notes, ATMs are running at a fraction of their capacity. Indian ATMs have 4 cassettes, each holding around 2,000 notes. 2 cassettes are typically configured for the old 500 rupee note, one for the legacy 1,000, and one for the still existing 100. They typically do not dispense 50s. Thus, the maximum an Indian ATM can provide in a post-demonetized India is 1 cassette worth of hundreds or 200,000 rupees. That's 3,000 US dollars. If everyone in the lineup removes 2,000 rupees, the daily limit, that means just 100 people can be served. That's peanuts. To get ATMs up to full capacity, all 4 cassettes need to be dispensing some combination of new 500 notes, 2,000 notes, and/or existing 50 and 100 notes. The problem is that each ATM cassette needs to be recalibrated to hold a certain denomination since notes are not uniformly shaped. With every single ATM in the country needing to be modified and only so much staff trained to do so, it's taking a lot of time. So, why didn't the government begin working with ATM companies a few months ago to make all the modifications in time for November 8th? This would have surely reduced the awful indignities that regular Indians must undergo as they wait for hours to withdraw cash. Unfortunately, any attempt to modify ATMs ahead of time would have caused Modi's aggressive demonetization to fail. In order to inflict maximum damage on those who depend on black money, i.e., income obtained illegally or not declared for tax purposes, an aggressive demonetization needs to be executed suddenly. If rumor gets out that a demonetization is about to occur, the element of surprise will be lost. Those working in the underground economy will simply switch their high-value banknotes into low ones ahead of the demonetization, thereby avoiding being damaged. And of course, it's the rich, not the poor, who have the best networks for gleaning information. To reduce the potential for information leaks, the number of people in the know needs to be kept to a minimum, and this means that all large-scale preparation including a huge reconfiguration of the ATM network, must be avoided. So if you support the idea of a demonetization, specifically one that's designed to hurt the underground economy, and in so doing draw people into the taxed economy, then you should just accept that this was always going to be a messy affair. If it had been a smooth one, then that would have been a sign that it wasn't being effective. Once the dust is settled, India will be made better off by the demonetization. That's the Banking Cartel trying to sell this. While many Indians in the underground sector will grudgingly comply and deposit their funds in an account only to withdraw that same amount in new notes later, others will keep their funds in the banking system. To change, people sometimes need to be prodded. This should be a shift in the right direction, given that a banked economy is stronger than an unbanked one. It's certainly more corrupt, that's for sure. My back-of-the-envelope calculation tells me that the demonetization will generate real pain on the underground economy. Consider that there are rupees 12.2 trillion worth of 1,000 and 500 notes in circulation, or 181 billion. Assume that 40% of these notes, or 4.9 trillion rupees, that's 72.7 billion US dollars, circulate in the dark economy and lack a paper trail. Further, assume that thanks to Indian ingenuity, or jugaad, half of the black money will sneak through the demonetization. That still leaves the remaining 2.4 trillion of rupees, or 36 billion US dollars, stranded. That's a painful write-off. To build and effectively run a nation, a government needs to be able to efficiently collect taxes. Many will shrug off the immense losses caused by the demonetization and go back to using cash as a way to evade taxes, especially now that the government has introduced a new 2,000 rupee banknote. But a large enough contingent will migrate to the tax-paying economy for good. Once bitten, twice shy. Well, that's one of the interpretations. Thank you for listening to another segment of the Network of Global Corporate Control. We've been talking about the plans in India, Australia, France, and indeed in the Secretariat of the International Monetary Fund to prevent people from using cash. Other forms of payment are microchips, credit cards, and all kinds of digital money. This would allow the banking cartel to control people. We draw the line here. Until next week, I'm your host, Karen Hudis.